All right, so this is a demo I did for Opus Art Supplies here in Vancouver during a live Zoom session back in December 2023. As you can see, the snow is now gone and I finally got around to editing video. So I hope you enjoy it. It's all about painting snow a little more vibrantly than you usually would by pushing color. All right, let's check it out. And I'm going to share my screen. And bear with me for a second here. Any initial questions? Saturation, I also mean chroma, so I'll use those two words swappingly. So I'll say the saturation of the color or the chroma of the color, which just means the intensity, how vibrant it is, how blue it is, for example. If it's really, really blue, or if it's a low chroma or a mid chroma, then it's more of a less saturated blue, duller kind of idea. All right, so here's my setup. I have the painting on the right-hand side there. I have my palette here. And I'm not going to go through my colors at the very start. I'll kind of go through them when I'm painting. I find it's a little more organic that way, and it sticks with people more than just listing colors for 15 minutes. Here's my sketch. I kind of redesigned it a little bit so I don't have as much trees in the middle. And you notice I have a little mark here called L1 and one called L2. And one of the issues people come up with the snow is they think snow is really white, really bright. So the snow ends up brighter than the sky. Some situations this is entirely true. In this situation it is not. A lot of the snow in this scene is light, but it's never as bright as the sky. That said, you could add areas that are brighter to help push your focus. And this is just in fine charcoal. And what I love about fine charcoal is you can easily remove it and it melts in with the oil paints. No problem. If you wanted, you could fix it with this, but no need really. And we're going to start with the sky, or I know actually we're going to start with the foliage here, the back foliage. I have to do some intermediate prep before we get into the fun stuff with the snow. And so I'm going to do my muted green trees in the back. They're a little kind of muted green. That's all I can really say. You get to choose. You don't have to be precise. Color doesn't really matter. That got a little bit too blue on me. That said, a lot of this is going to change. And so we're just looking for that values. I notice I'm not putting it in the sky right now. I'm going to put it in this wash and then we're going to do some negative painting. It's not sky. It's over here. Yeah, this is board 1/8 inch mahogany, and I primed it with oil primer. I find I really like that more than acrylic primer when I'm painting oils. Yeah, I think Gamblin makes one. They make a ground, and other companies make one as well. But so we kind of have these in place, kind of making some marks because there's trees back there. We'll worry about that later. And as we come forward and we have the darker trees, I'm going to push aerial perspective because it makes for a more interesting painting. So it's a little bit darker. I'm going to mute the green, and I make my own black using ultramarine blue and transparent red oxide, just because it's a convenient color. And let's see how that looks. I like that value. Got a little too green on me. We'll see. So here's this tree in the foreground left area, right? But I'm not really concerned. I'm just looking for an interesting shape. I'm not trying to find the exact shape. We can tweak that later. There's this shape here as well. Soft edges at the beginning really help you not care about um, getting things wrong or fixing things too much, right? So really soft edges. Now, one thing you'll see if you were to saturate this photo, which is really interesting, is there's some green nuance here. So I'm going to make this dark water. I'm going to use the same green here. Although this tree isn't reflecting, I noticed some nuance of green there. So that's what saturation can do for you in a photo editing app, right? So I'll leave that there. Now for the snow itself. And blue can never have enough blue when painting snow. That said, you have to create some interest. So if you look down on my palette here, this is white and ultramarine blue, which is the PB29. This is a cobalt blue, PB28 white. This is a cerulean blue hue. Now, the beauty of a cerulean blue hue is it's a phthalo and white, so it's a premixed phthalo and white, PB15:4, I think, which means it's going to be more vibrant than just a straight cobalt. And then over here, yeah, just off my palette, but you can see the pile of paint here. That's a cobalt turquoise, which has a nice different vibe to it. So 3 different blues, 3 different vibes. Cobalt turquoise is a PB28. It's the exact same number as cobalt blue, PB28. It's just heated longer to bring out different colors. And so it's always nice to have a variety instead of, you can always pre-mix stuff too if you wanted. But I'm going to start with kind of a blue and ultramarine on the sides here. We'll worry about the nuance of all this later. We're just trying to get this in. Fill in the big shapes. We kind of have a shadow in here. And so what I'll do is I'll take some of this pile, mix in some ultramarine blue. Any questions so far? And not a phthalo out of the tube, but my cerulean blue hue is actually made up of a phthalo blue and white. It's pre-mixed. So it's not as strong as the phthalo, so I find it more controllable. And that's the only way I use phthalo. Yeah, glass palette gessoed with white, and if you can see on the bottom here, I think you can, I put in like a 10% black, a 50% black, and a pure black. So if I'm working in a value, as I build my painting, I can put it down, squint, and kind of see where the values are. So this instance, this value here is lighter than 50%, but darker than 10%. So I kind of know where everything is. It just helps me. It's my personal way of working. You don't necessarily have to have those in there. Yes, I just got a piece of glass cut and then I gessoed the back. Ultramarine blue, transparent red oxide, and Hansa yellow medium. Good question. It's a long filbert natural hair. Yeah, it is a number 6, but the name has worn off it. It's made in Sri Lanka. Now you can see here, this blue got a little bit too dark. I mean, not too dark, too saturated. So I'm going to go into my homemade black and kind of just decrease the chroma and fill that in. Because really, you got to remember where your focal point is, and the whole idea of a painting is not to paint all the colors that you see in the photograph, but to design the painting so that you're going to go towards your focal point. And so we can choose a focal point here, or we can choose it here, kind of depending how you want to push. We'll see where we end up, but I have a feeling this painting is just going to be an entire mess with the idea of something, not necessarily the full thing. And use my black with maybe a little bit of blue in it, a little bit of white, because I want a dark water, but I don't want it's super dark yet, so I'll just lay this in. And this black is made with ultramarine blue and transparent red oxide. You can use burnt sienna. 6 of one, half dozen another, right? The other side. There we go. And as we go down here, we get a little darker. And as I progress through the painting, I might have to adjust the exposure on my camera just so you guys can see some stuff. But let's see. Now, as we progress into the painting, I'm going to switch to my cobalt and white. And it's about the same value as my ultramarine and white. We'll see where this takes us. And what the idea is, I just take cleaner colors into the painting rather than using them on the outside. And cleaner colors, I just mean, good question, what do I mean by cleaner colors? That's a tough one. Ultramarine blue is a beautiful color. However, I find it, for lack of a better word, dirtier, less chromatic, even though it's a beautiful violet blue, than say like a cobalt and white mixture, right? You can see it's a little more just more lovely. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm primarily just using Gamsol to thin as I go. Throw in some darker cobalt, maybe a touch of black. I'm doing this reflection here in the water. Clean my brush, go back up to the snow up top. And so what we're going to get into, I'm just massing things in. It's kind of a nice procedure to do it. You just got to remember where you are within a painting. So these are just blocks of color. Maybe to show you what I mean is I will add a little bit of light on the top of that snow. So I'll go into some white with my cobalt and white mixture. And I'm not really worrying too much about broken color or color shifting or temperature shifting right now. I'm just trying to establish my value pattern. Right? And I know there's another one right here coming up and around that bank. Nice. So we get a little bit of form there already, right? And maybe we'll go in with the ultramarine, a little bit of black. And you might be saying, oh, that's counterintuitive, black. But black is very good at killing chroma of a color and reducing the value. So whether it's a homemade chromatic black or black out of the tube, just remember that it's going to do what it's going to do, which is kill the intensity of the color, but also lighten or darken the value. And I'm primarily using it to kill the chroma of it, just because I don't want to compete with here, because my whole idea is to drive you up. All right, so we have this nice massive value here, but you can see in the image that this part of the snow is a little bit lighter. So I'm going to take that same mixture pile that I have, throw in some white, maybe a little more blue to get the saturation up again. You could start a new pile, but I find it's easier just to continue. Sometimes you have to start a new pile. And so here the nuance is slight where that is. And we'll just leave that because we can't really judge that too much yet. And I see a little bit there. So if you're finicky about all these strokes that you're doing at the beginning, don't worry about it, because once all you finish blocking in, you're going to go in and have to adjust everything again. So 10 minutes you fretted over this saturation or this value of this blue could have been saved by just throwing something in comparably to this. And once everything's blocked in, then you'll be able to actually compare it with something. We have a shadow blue or snow in the shadow there, so I'm going to use my black, although let's throw in a little bit of transparent red oxide because that tree will reflect into the snow here. See, this value is exactly the same, which tells me that I have to darken that. So you'll never really know what color you're using on your palette. You can think you have it right and spend hours mixing the right color, but until you put it on your painting, you don't know. So it's better to mix, test, mix and test, mix and test, right? And this comes up like this, and we'll bring this into there. I might be able to use this here, although that's probably a little bit darker. Since I have that on my brush, I'll make this a little darker. And I skip over my painting a lot. I move around. I like that value. Notice that we have a little bit of lighter value back here. Maybe I can do a small gradation there. And I can see this is lighter snow in here, right? Might be tough to see on the image. But I don't want to make this snow as white as, say, over here, because it's going to have a lot of contrast and pull your eye too much. So when I mix that white, I'll darken it up. I don't like using oil because I find it's too slippery. I've been there, done that. What I recently gone on to is the Gamblin solvent-free liquid. And what I like about that, oddly, is it has a sticky quality to it. And I found out that I like that. The oil gets too slippery, but with the solvent-free fluid, you can actually feel it has a better, to me, a better consistency, a better trade-off in terms of extending my paint, but also giving me the brush feel that I want on my palette. So I'm slowly building up this snow. I'm going to go up in here, and let's do a cobalt and an ultramarine mix. Think about cobalt as it's a warm blue, ultramarine is a cool blue, or no, yeah, ultramarine's a warm blue, cobalt's a cool blue, so technically they neutralize a little bit, so it becomes a unique blue in itself. I like that. These values coming close don't banter me because I'm going to throw in some foliage there. And for where the bank meets the shadow, it's always nice to just quickly go over it, create that soft edge. Hard edge are your nemesis, right? They'll draw the eye. People will be critical. You do a soft edge, and people don't care. It's kind of fun that way. And this is all to get the base. Once we have the base, then we can start having a little more fun. And the reason why I'm using a lot of blues is because there's a lot of blues here. But we'll switch it up in a bit. And there's another step there, so I'm going to do a white. So I use a lot of white painting snow. You can see none of this is white. I'll probably never, there's only been one instance that I've ever used white, like full, just titanium white in a snow painting. And I thought that was really odd. But sometimes it asks for it, and other times it never does. So maybe a little more white, just to get that turn on that edge. No, I don't color ground anything. Feel free, absolutely. Kind of neat way to do it. It pokes through, creates harmony, blah, blah, blah. I just don't like it. Um, and there's different reasons for it. Yeah, if it's a sunny day, maybe I'll go with an Indian yellow, see if I can work with that before it burns my eyes out. You can always do the traditional sienna, right? Or burnt umber. You could try fully blue, but then that's defeating the purpose because blue peeking through blue is kind of irrelevant, right? So you can go with more of a purely red, which runs on the orange side, or you can go permanent orange so the orange can push through as a complement. Now we're starting to get into the tree area as we build this back up. And as we come across, I'll lighten it, and we're getting towards the horizon, a little bit of the sky, so maybe I'll throw in some ochre. Now, keep in mind, this ochre here that I have on my palette, you can just see it peeking through, is made by a company called Cama out of Montreal. Their yellow ochre has a PY43 and a PY42. Now, the PY42 makes it more of a golden ochre. So if you want to simulate kind of what I'm using here, golden ochre is more of your choice. Traditional yellow ochre is a PY43, and it's a lot more green or a lot more dull. So that's why I like their ochres, because it's more vibrant. And so just kind of getting a little bit of cast in that blue in the background. Now let's work on the sky. And why am I leaving the sky until now? Well, a couple of reasons. The main being that is I put in all these trees. And now that the oil has a bit of time to set in, it's going to be easier for me to put the sky in. However, if I just painted these trees, started the sky, I get a lot more smudging and mixing. So having this sit and let the oil and the mineral spirit soak into the ground a little bit first will help when I add the sky. And the sky's a fun one because in this piece, it's ochre, which leans then towards blue. But then we also have the back mountains in the foreground background, I guess, and they're very atmospheric perspective. Now, in any sky you do, look for two gradations, right? Think of the gradation top to bottom, of course, you'll have. It'll be darker, lighter. But depending where the sun is, it'll also be darker. Like, say, if the sun's over here on the right, we'll have darker to lighter at a diagonal, and it could be cooler, warmer. So skies generally will always have two gradations. Saying that, feel free to just use one gradation, feel free to use no gradation, but if you want a more representational look, a little more interesting look, and a way to drive the viewer, use the two different gradations. Gradations are your friend. Paintings are nothing more, successful painting is nothing more than variety. Now the sky is really light, so I'm mixing this pigment here. You can test it against your snows on your palette, and you can see that it's quite light, which is nice. We'll put some in here. Yeah, that's nice and vibrant. Maybe a little more. There we go. And you can see it's quite, let's see, rich and thick. So now comes the fun part of negative painting. And you kind of just play with it. Don't worry about painting trees, okay? That'll just make you frustrated. Play with negative shapes. And then next thing you know, you'll have trees. Look for the shape, look for the slope. Keep your brush. That's why I like bristle brushes for this, in that they keep a soft edge. I'm not pushing too hard. It's all soft. I do drop my brushes a lot because of how light I hold everything. Here, up. And the beauty of this is, as long as I look at the trees, they're going to be trees. Because no one's going to look at the photo when you show them this painting, right? So what do they know? The worst thing you can do as an artist, I think, is show the photo along with the painting, because everything everyone's going to do is just nitpick. Look at that. Look at this. Let's try the area. All right. So I'm taking this over diagonally, and I might have to repaint this guy later on. Who knows? I don't know. Let's take this into here. Only if it demands it. If I put the sky holes in and they look too light, yeah, I'll darken them. Doesn't always necessarily have to be the case. What's more important is temperature and than anything else. No, I'm using Kama, K-A-M-A. Yeah, because their yellow ochre has a PY42 in it, and so it would be the equivalent of another brand's golden ochre. I don't know if Gamble makes a golden ochre or not. PY42 and PY43 is what's in Kama. I'm just gonna dip into this cerulean blue hue just because I like the vibrancy of this blue a little bit better, but I'm going to leave it light, and that's kind of probably too light. Here we go. And these two skies intermix. Yeah, just look for, turn it over, PY42, PY43. Generally the name that they'll give it is golden, or yeah, golden ochre. So you could start with that. All right. All right, now we have some back area here that's a little more, I don't want to call it light neutral. Actually, start with the black. And so this is just context, right? We're just looking for that value. Maybe add a little bit of yellow in it, maybe some ochre to get that sky feel. Not much. These are the distant trees that we have in the background. And their shape's important, but it's not really important. Um, and then we can come in and redo the trees as well. It's always a back and forth process. Maybe a little bit later. Like I said, it's just you gotta do this part before you get the fun of the snow. We've still got about 45 minutes to go, so lots of time. And stand back, have a look. Doesn't feel like it's in the distance enough, so I'm going to add a little bit of white. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. That's better. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it through the video, but very nice textures here. This brush. It's one of the reasons why I like bristle brushes. I'll switch to a more synthetic one later. And so now there's blues in the background. So I'm going to go over. So this slopes down, this slopes up. And so I didn't put the snow in before, but I can now. Okay, now we have the reflection of the water, which is just the sky, but generally it'll be a little bit darker. So a little more yellow ochre in that original mix. The sky. This is when it starts to come to life, right? And so, perfect complement, right? I mean, orangey and blue. Could argue that we want it darker as we progress up, so we're going to create a gradient. Well, you get to choose, right? You can pick it darker here, pick it darker here. All right, gradate this shape. Do the silent if you can hear it. There we go. More interesting shape, just because it gradates, right? Gradations are your friend. It's something simple you can do. And of course, as we come down here, it'll be that light blue. Whatever works. Don't fret over it. And then we have some rich, rich darks. And here, where we have this shadow coming. Over here, back, right here. So now we get to have some fun. So depending on our focal point, if we want to push up into this area here, oh, I missed a dark. There we go. So there's a block in. So depending how we want to focus this painting will determine how we progress with the snow. And I've kind of already done it here already by muting these blues here. Instead of being the same as over here, you get a variation. And this is less interesting than this because this is more chromatic. So you see this, but you skip over to here. And we're going to try to drive your eye up here. So we could make the focal point up here. We could try to make it the water just because of the saturation. If we don't want the focal point here with saturation, we can reduce that saturation, etc., etc. But let's try to build up that snow. So we're going to make it quite a bit lighter. Maybe we'll go into our cobalt teal because it's such a wonderful color. And we'll put that on top here. Nice. So you can see already you're putting the light on that snowbank and you're already driving up. And so if we were to start using this somewhere else, like if you look in the photo, you can see that the lights here are pretty much the same as the lights here, right? But if you start putting this here, all right, so what happens? Equal values, you're tending to, you to go here, but they will go here instead, just because it's a larger size, more contrast, etc., etc. So we don't really want that. We're going to design it so you skip over that. So I'm just scrubbing that in. And now with just that, like this, little subdued, softer edges, oh yeah, it's a little bit snow, but then you skip up to here. Now to make it interesting, we can start adding a variety of color because we know there's this sky up here. We can mix the snow with this yellow ochre that I have. And within that section here now, like nowhere in this photo do you see this, but we know because this is getting that sky light, we can add some of that on top of this. Maybe go into our blue again and decide that we want this blue here is a little more green. Because what happens now is it shifts over. You're turning the form, right? You're creating more mass within this value, right? So I'm trying to just slowly build that up. Now, if this, say this is a sharp edge and it bothers you, you can come in and soften it. And we have a little sky hole in this tree here. And, you know, don't worry about sky holes. They're random. Think of it as you're painting it, you sneeze. And so your brush will skip or whatever, right? You want it random. The more you think about it, the more contrived it's going to be and the less realistic it'll be. And, you know, that stroke bothered me, but I'm not going to touch it because I got more important things to do. And we've built some form up here already, but let's build some form back here. And I know that was more of an ultra. We're going to reduce it with white or increase the value, I guess. And see if we can add a little bit of variety here. And so this looks white, but it's not. So when I'm ask myself, okay, when I put this stroke down, does it affect my focal point? No, I don't instantly go over to it, but it adds interest to this. But you can see this is very monotonous. So instead of adding another form here, I'm going to actually go to a darker form or darker blue. You can choose to make it more chromatic, less chromatic, but your choices will affect the overall painting, right? I'm going a little more lower chromatic. I'm going to add some value here. There we go, a little bit darker. So now this kind of turns the form, so it's darker here and up a little bit more. And if that chroma isn't enough for you, you can add some and we'll see what happens. So this is really high chroma, but if we blend it enough, I think we'll be able to get away with it. We'll see. I think we do have to add a turning form now that I added the dark, because you have the dark and the light. We need a secondary form here. Nice. So it looks like it's staggered now. And maybe we can add that here as well. Problem I have with this now is I don't really get a lead in with the foreground. And so I'm going to go straight to a darker value. Now you can see in the photo down here in the bottom right, it's darker, but it's not that much darker. But I'm going to go for something that's quite dark, not as chromatic. Do a test. Okay, big brush. You kind of get the gist of that. All right, We're going to make it darker still, believe it or not. So what are we doing? We're using gradations. There we go. So 3 brush strokes are there. We have something dark to push you over. So dark, darkest dark, leads into a little more unsaturated blue. Now because we have this dark here, this is a little bit too bright. So we can go in and modify that value. So this just emphasizes the fact that, just because you put it down at the start doesn't mean it's going to stay there. Painting is nothing more than a series of corrections, right? So you put it down, best guess, and then work from there. All right. And so we have a dark, which leads us up into here. It doesn't lead us enough, so we need a way to keep on continuing. And you just adjust it with value. So maybe we want to enhance this green snow a little bit, a little more Viridian. So this time I'm going straight into Viridian. When you buy Viridian, well, you can use a hue, but it's tough because they use phthalos. But PG18 is a beautiful pigment, especially when you add white. So let's just do that up there. So now it's about just building up layers of interest. A little lighter Viridian there. All right, but notice this stroke isn't the entire section, right? I'm not undoing what I did. I'm just creating a little step. Maybe a little bit there. Stepping back, looking, seeing how that pushes me through. Let's take this little mixture here. Let's add some red to it. See what happens. All right, just because red, you can't see red, doesn't mean it's not there. We'll see. Maybe if I add it back here, what does that do for us? I kind of like that. It helps harmonize everything going on here. Now, could I use this red somewhere else? And I'm not using this red somewhere else just because, sometimes you say, instructors say, if you have the color, try it somewhere else. I'm thinking that maybe it could be beneficial to create just interest. And so this is what we get into called broken color. And so these two values are the same, or temperature shifting, right? These two values are the same down here, but this one's warmer than this one. And you can think of it as 2 different colors, but I like to think of it as temperature. It just helps. A lot of you out there will think in terms of colors, nuance. Some of you will think in temperature. And without a doubt, the sky is taking away from, or the sky reflection is taking away from the snow. So I'm going to subdue that chroma a little bit. Too dark. Let's see. And by subduing that chroma a little bit, now we're starting to really help bring your eye in. And this is a very flat color. So if you wanted to, you could add a little bit of temperature shifting, value shifting in there. Just not a lot. Just create a little bit of interest here and there. Let's get that reflection in the water here. It's kind of cool. And how important is this reflection? It's important, but not really. It's there for context only, right? We're not doing a painting of this reflective water. We're doing a painting of the snow. So, and I think we did go into the trees a little bit, start giving them some form, and it helps me think about what's going on with the snow here. Obviously, already you can see this reflection, I would say, is a bit too saturated. We'll have to dull that, but let's get into the trees first, just so we can build this up a little bit more. And this is just ultramarine and Hansa yellow. I'm looking for that right value to go on top of here for these branches. And this is already the dark, so I'm going on top of it. And kind of just how I see these going. And then we can get into some of these grasses that are coming down here. And this is why I like a bristle brush as well. You can drag, and it creates that grassy effect automatically. So now we get depth through layering. All right, let's take this. We do have a tree trunk here. Right, this tree somewhere in here comes down. Still using a relatively large brush. This I've dropped down to probably a 4. We could argue that maybe some of these darks in the tree are not dark enough. And bring in some too chromatic of a blue. So I'm just going to adjust that. I want that darker value in there. And it's just adjusting. You don't get it right, keep working on it. Build it up. Here we need some richer darks as well. Use this opportunity to add in some of these branches. Create a little bit of interest. Here, the snow comes across like that. Now let's have more fun with the snow. So I'm going to move over to a synthetic brush. I just happen to be using Rosemary Ivories, which is a nice brush, but any synthetic brush is nice to work with. What it does, it'll leave more paint, and it's easier to paint over paint. So we're going to fix this reflection here. And that was this blue, I believe. A little darker. I'm going to kill the chroma. You can add the transparent red oxide, but I use my chromatic black that I make. Probably a little bit darker. So it's all value control, really. And if that edge bothers you, you can go in and adjust it a little bit. Right, every brush stroke has 4 edges. You get to decide what those edges are like. Sometimes you just need to adjust the stroke. There we are, reflection. And so we have a little issue on this side. I find it's a little bit flat, so we're just going to build it up. But what we're going to build up, though, is just some lights up here. But these lights will never be as light as over here because you just don't want that competition. Especially if our focal point is up here. If you make these too bright, then it competes with it, right? But we do need a little bit of light coming on there. So I'm putting the darker the water here and using the light value as the reflection of that snowbank. If that is too light, I'll just scrub over it once or twice to try to get it to sit properly. And now we have some nice contrast. But note that this contrast doesn't compete with this contrast. You kind of travel up, right? That said, we could reduce that value as you come up. And you could push it towards more blue, too, at the same time, right? Or actually, it's a little more sienna, so let's do that. So sienna, or transparent red oxide, a little more white. And so what we're doing here, a little more white, remember mix and test, is we have a gradation from dark to light, but also cool to warm. But it's all relative. It's not hot warm. It's a transparent red oxide kind of / sienna warm, right? So it isn't overly warm. It's just in comparison to here, it's warmer. That makes sense. And you can have some fun with it and put some blue in and do an intermediate. But remember how I initially said it was green here? Well, we just make sure we throw some more green in here. Could be interesting. Right, so now there's variety in there. And if you have issues like this, oh, I screwed up the blue a little bit. Well, that's okay. I can just dry brush it over, get some paint on, push it through. If you don't like the shape, adjust the shape. If you don't like the shape, go back into the dark. Kind of figure out how you want to make it look. And so let's have a little more fun, right? So we push the value into this section here, but let's push it a little bit more. So why don't we go from the orangey, light orange, to some white. I'm running out of spots now. I'm going to go just Hansa yellow. I use Hansa yellow medium. You can see how light that is. Push your brush through it, get a nice piece, and nice thick paint. There we go. So bang, come right up. If that's too obvious, of course, you can make it a little more subtle, however you want. If you want a little more interest in the background there, why don't we go to this Viridian? I love Viridian in snow and in skies. Maybe if we combine that Viridian over here with a little bit of that pink, it creates a really nice area to look, but it doesn't take you away from the main focal point. Now, if you're just trying to hold this whole painting together with that one focal point, it might be tough. So why don't we try to use the water in our favor? Go to that yellow ochre, and we'll throw in some of this transparent orange. Now, this is the first time touching this transparent orange because it's a beautiful orange. If you're an acrylic, well, if you're an oil painter, this is made by Gamblin. It's called transparent orange. If you're an acrylic painter, you can't buy this. You got to make it yourself. And this pigment is just 4 parts Indian yellow and 1 part Perylene red. So 4 parts PY83 and 1 part PR149, and you get this beautiful transparent orange. So let's see if this is too light. Yeah, I need a little more ochre orange feeling to it. And so I pretty much used every color in here. Oh, except violet. Let's get into the violet. Although this looks more like violet into here. There we go. So That little bit of light there, that helps support this value up here. And if those edges bother you, subdue those edges. Got a little bit too bright here, subdue that. Kind of a no-brainer now that it comes up into here. Maybe you want a little more interest in this reflection, so we'll make it a tad bit lighter. So just a secondary value. Maybe as we come to the top of that reflection, it gets lighter because so does the snow. So already some interest. It doesn't really look like much because we don't have that dark line where it meets the ground. So let's create that dark line now. Dark blue with a bit of sienna or whatever you want in it. The value is the most important. So we'll do a mix, we'll do a test. Not dark enough. So more blue, more sienna. Really just get the value, right? I didn't want to use just blue because I didn't want it just standing out as just blue. So here we're going to do a nice delicate line. You could use a palette knife, and we'll get into that in a second. And then this line kind of, whoops, unintentional brush drag. So I messed that up. There we go. So now you can see where the water meets the snow. So we're starting to get a really, really better sense of depth. Now the trees are lacking, of course. We could build those up a little bit more. Let's build this tree up a little bit more. Just trying to make this more interesting. Now let's get into some violets, because why not? I have a premixed violet that I really like. It's my ultramarine blue, PB29, with a permanent alizarin crimson, which is generally a PR 177. So you can just look for that pigment. And it's beautiful violet just because, this is a warm blue, this is a cool red, and so each of them lean towards violet. So when you mix them together, they give you the most intense mixing violet you can on my palette. That said, if you want to use diazoxine violet, feel free. Now we've got to figure out where we could use this, depending on the value. And I don't know. Let's have a look. I think the chroma is going to be so intense. Maybe we can put a little bit here, up towards the focal point. But you can see, right, if I was to put this here, it starts to compete over here. So I would probably kill that a little bit by adding some transparent red oxide, or even your yellow ochre. Get that value right. See what we got. Yeah, the stroke, although it has interest in terms of a shift in temperature, I've lost my little crest of light. So I'm going to go into maybe my cobalt blue, mix in some white, do a test. That's probably a little too light. Throw a little more cobalt. I like that. So let's bring this up here. So just trying to create a variety of shapes. I could maybe bring that in a little bit lighter. You just have to be careful with your values, right? There we are. Not bad. So a little more interest in here, but it doesn't take away from there. Looking at this as a whole, though, maybe I can make this bottom corner dark now, like super dark. Why not, right? Go for the drama. And so more of an instant gradation up, right? You look down here, but you want to look up just because of the gradation there. And if you find it too much, of course, you can always subdue it. All depends on what you want to do. You're the artist, right? But if you're just copying a photo, then you're not really the artist, are you? You left your artistic license at home for some reason. Here we are. We could use this dark over here as well. Put that in there just so we get the feeling of that deep snow. So we can maybe make this snowbank a little more interesting back there. So why don't we go into the cobalt teal, see what that does for us. It's a nice warmish blue. You just got to make sure it doesn't compete. The value, I mean, doesn't compete. All right, so nice stroke. I like this, how this adds a little more interest in there. It allows me to adjust that shape of that tree. Adds another sense of interest, but it doesn't take away from our focal point, right? Maybe we can push the value up here a little bit with our gradient. We shall see. How did that go? Yeah, I like that. It has another light value, but it doesn't necessarily take away from our focal point. Maybe if we add a little bit of our sky color in there, see what happens. Maybe we can make it even more interesting. Now you can see this is very brushy, and we've really designed a structure with it, and it's quite interesting, but sometimes you just need something else. And so that's when you move to a knife, palette knife, because a palette knife will give you interesting strokes, but not necessarily the same as your brush. Whoops, got caught on there a little bit. So it kind of flattens things out a little bit and melts things together a little bit in terms of the edges. And so that melting together of those edges is nice because it's like an instant softener, right? Although I tried to scrape that off a little bit too much, so let's get that dark back again. I got some screws holding this panel on, so it's hard to get in there. Interesting things happen that you just couldn't otherwise, right? And that might bother you initially, but until you step away and look at it, you don't really know. So let's use the palette knife over here as well. There. Have a look. It got a little bit out of control, so why don't we just subdue that a little bit with the brush. And so nice combination here down here now. I really like that. Work it till you're happy with it. But controlled strokes, right? With the backdrop here in the trees, let's just see if we can make a quick interesting change in terms of, this is very monotonous, right? So that light gray that I had back there, let's add some ochre to it, lighten it. And so now this back mountain is influenced by the sky more, and so it's a little more interesting up to a certain point, and then we'll stop. Because we're not trying to change the whole thing again, we're just trying to change a section of it. And then maybe what we do is we go a little bit lighter still, a little more yellow ochre, and so you just ask yourself questions like, where can I add variety, where can I add a little bit of change? So now we have a gradation from not necessarily value, but temperature, cool, warm. So it kind of brings you in. The sky became a little bit too monotonous. Let's fix that. We'll go to our sky color, which is our ochre and white. And by now this is really set in. So if we just mix a nice big pile of this stuff, make this a little bit darker. Take this opportunity to redesign the trees if something bothers you. All right, but this dark will only go so far too. We're not going to replace the entire sky with it. And you'll just take more care into doing negative shapes than I'm taking right now because I'm just quickly trying to throw these in for a demo, right? You can see a little bit of this blue snow back here. Play around with that a little bit more. And so we have quite a bit of variety now. Maybe we can use the power of gradations as well when the snow here, where this is all somewhat same value. Let's darken the right side of this. So now this peninsula will drive you through, right? You're going to see a huge difference. So we'll go with cobalt because, I don't know, just feel like it. It's a cooler blue. Let's go a little darker. There we go. Let's try to push that a little bit more. One more step. So very cerebral process. All right, so it's darker, and if we want to push it really to the max. All right, now we got to add a little bit of nuance to it because I lost this beautiful little shift of light here. But now we have this darker blue over here, lighter blue, and a little more interesting temperature shifting or broken color here. And the tendency is to push us towards the left. So for me now, this really stands out. And so we're going to take the last 10 minutes-ish to show you what not to do in terms of your value. Because if you look at this photo, you can see this bank here has quite light. You know, in some instances, it's probably lighter than this over there. So if you get caught up in it and you forget your focal points here and you're looking at your reference photo and you think, oh yeah, that's nice bright white there, right? Then what happens is all of a sudden you've taken away interest from here. It becomes, the focal point is increased over here, and now it's a little bit too much. And then if they do the same thing down here, especially with this contrast, right? I'm kind of doing this, boom, 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 hip, 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 and then viewers kind of get lost. Like I love this contrast, but it's really messing with my focal point. Let's subdue that, bring that back down. We could keep it interesting. Maybe it's more Viridian, but we're just going to control that value. It doesn't have to be blue, right? There's a little bit of interest in there, but it's not competing with this anymore. What else? Maybe we can push, although it's not in the photo, maybe we can push the dark of this bank a little bit more, get the right brush, just so we have more contrast against the light. But we would need a blue that isn't very saturated. And the whole idea is I am painting this painting for the sake of the painting. I am not painting it to copy the photo, right? Everything I do, I'm going to do for the painting. And part of it is leaving out this highlight, because as soon as I start putting a lot of these highlights in, I'm creating detail that I don't want. Now, saying that, you could try. You just make sure your values are not too light, right? As soon as those values get too light, you're going to pull away from that focal point, right? If this is competing with this, it's pretty simple. You just take that dark, whatever that was. Let's lighten it up. How light? All right, so that's a little bit less. Maybe then we can change the perspective of the sky where this is lighter, but maybe what we can do is force some more darkness to it so it doesn't stand out as much. Right? And so it's not the photo, no, but it's still kind of interesting in terms of the reflections we've created, right? So now the contrast is substantially less, and it doesn't pull us as much as before. So these are the things you got to fight with with a painting, right? It's always a back and forth, back and forth. I'm just trying something here. So definitely I would have to play with this section in here as well. This blue got a little more vibrant, too vibrant compared to what I would have want when I started using the palette knife. And so maybe I can rework that now. Yeah, generally always ask yourself, what's the focal point? And so my focal point here, I chose these banks. So the farther away I get from these banks, the less important it is. Yes, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rework the trees a little bit more, of course, to give it a more sense of forest instead of just whatever this ended up being, right? But and you see in the photo, like we have a lot of the vertical tree trunks. Maybe I leave some of those out. Less detail. All these little patches of wavy snow here I leave out because they're not important to my focal point. So you get to decide, really. You get to really play. Let's say you really want these divots in here. Well, you just have to make sure you put them in properly in the right value. Don't follow the value of the photo because you've already changed the whole structure of this painting to match your focal point, right? Now, let's say if this focal point was more up here, right, then this would be more subdued. You bring in the rich value of this snow over here and really make that drive up. So that's how I would say, that's how you determine what you want to put in and what you want to take out, right? Ooh, that's a very good question. So why don't we just take a darker green? Because they're not in the photo, but who cares? So let's put them in. Do a test. And I know we have a whole bunch over here too, but let's put some green in here. And then of course we want to take our brush. I got a nice brush here for that. We want these trees. So this is where the design of the background is important too, right? Notice that, this tree here is a little bit offset of this peak. So if I put a tree right here, it would intersect it. The idea with this tree is, if I was to build it up, of course, but it's supposed to be right there. Focal point, this tree would, there, look at this tree here. Comes across, it's kind of mixes into that. We have some here, this one here. And as we get into the darks, well, no, this is more sand, so we don't really get the reflections on the sand area, and if we want to make them darker, because I would tend to go darker at the base and then let it subdue itself naturally over the length. And then, yeah, that would also start driving us up. And then maybe that means, well, maybe we can force this lighter now even because we have more of a pocket of light instead of a large area. Two nice divots. And that helps break up that area. So I would say very much so. It helps lead you in better. So good catch. Oh, I do have a workshop in June through the FCA, Abstracting the Landscape. So if you're local, you can always go to their website and sign up, or go to my website. There's a link to it. but that's a few months away. So just trying to add a little interest in the background here. I'm just fiddling more than anything, right? Not necessarily for the sake of this demo and just kind of ideas for later. But you will notice there's one thing here. These two trees ended up being the same level, which is terrible. So I will use this, pull that across. So now these two trees are at a different level and they create more variety, right? So, all right. I think I'll leave that there for now. If there's not any more questions, thank you very much for attending from all over the place. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. If you happen to have any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. All right, take care, everyone. Cheers.